Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Parveen Banu, and I'm a student of Department of Disability Studies in Rabindra Bharati University. It's an honor to welcome all the dignitaries and address all the participants today on the second day of the international webinar on vulnerable groups and human rights, jointly organized by Department of Human Rights and Human Development and Department of Disability Studies, Rabindra Bharati University. After a successful event yesterday, we will be looking forward to make today's session equally informative, innovative, and engaging. To begin with, I would at first like to invite Dr. Payal Rai Chaudhary Dutt, the coordinator of Department of Human Rights and Human Development, Rabindra Bharati University, to deliver the welcome. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Parveen, and your friends Victoria, Upasna, Pubali, and Abhishek for getting us through any technical glitch, even at the last moment. Thank you for that. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, and a very warm welcome to the record 320 plus people from around the world who are watching us right now through YouTube live stream. When we first announced the theme of this program, planning to start it on the International Disability Day, the 3rd of December, and concluding on the Human Rights Day, the 10th of December, and we titled it Vulnerable Groups and Human Rights, we did not really know how much it would resonate with us. There is perhaps nothing like a global pandemic which forces us to see how deep our vulnerability and how interconnected and interdependent we stand. Faced with this pandemic, and we know that no one is going to come out of this unscathed, there are still too many people who are carrying other burdens of inequality, of race and gender, and so on, that the pandemic has really magnified. And while we had a day one which convened on the International Disability Day on the same theme, the day two of this international webinar aims to investigate vulnerability through the lens of gender, in particular, women and girls. I feel particularly elated to welcome the paper presenters today from across the country and beyond who shall investigate these issues through the course this morning and early afternoon. I'm happy and grateful very much to welcome Professor Narayan Chakravarti, Nirmalu Narayan Chakravarti, who is not just the director of the Internal Quality Assurance Cell of Rabindra Bharati University, but a longtime friend of the Department of Human Rights and Human Development, as of so many others. We are very grateful to you, sir, for giving us the opening remarks. Professor Chakraborty's primary discipline is philosophy, and the research work spans philosophy of language, epistemology, and ethics. His ideas and books have been necessary to the course curriculum of very many universities, such as in Canada or Italy or Scotland, around the world. I have also a deep sense of gratitude to record to be able to welcome our truly esteemed resource person and a giant in her area of work, a veteran crusader and an advocate for the rights of the domestic worker women in the urban sphere, who, busy as she is, has found time to be with us time and again at the Department of Human Rights and Human Development. Very honored to have you, ma'am, Ms. Anshita Ghatak, for so kindly agreeing to be our keynote speaker this morning and the chair of the subsequent session. I also extend a very warm welcome to the director of the Women's Studies Center at Rabindra Bharati University, Professor Shati Ghosh, who will be joining us in the next session. I extend a very warm welcome once again to everyone for being here with us and look forward to a great 3 hours ahead. Thank you so much. Over to you, Parveen.
Sorry. Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am, for elucidating the day's subject quite efficiently and welcoming everyone so warmly. It's a privilege to be here today. to represent the dignities from different fields. Today, we will be inviting lectures and presentations on women and girls from various resource persons, students, and professionals. Before proceeding to the invited lectures, I would like to brief the participants that we will be welcoming your questions on each lecture as well as presentation, which you can drop on the comment section while the respective person is performing and as soon as they finish it. To move on with, I would now like to solicit the Honorable Director of Internal Quality Assurance Cell of Rabindra Bharati University, Professor Nirmali Narayan Chakrabarti, to deliver a lecture on today's topic. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. At the very outset, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to the organizers of this workshop. And although I'm not the right person to speak on the theme of the seminar of the workshop, still, as a student of philosophy, I would like to very briefly share some of my responses on issues that are relevant to the focal theme of this discussion. Um, any crisis affects people uh, in a disadvantaged position more severely than others. In more than one way, women and girls of all social strata have been very, very badly affected. There are many facets of this vulnerability. The crisis is manifest in different levels. As a student of philosophy, I would like to share with you my understanding of the facet of, of one of the facets of this crisis. People have been talking of existential crisis arising out of the pandemic and consequent lockdown that has affected people, causing serious damage to mental health. No doubt, women and girls are at the receiving end of this mental health problem. What we have seen in the last few months is how this pandemic has affected the entire world, the rich and the poor, the mighty and the weak. A country that boasts of being the biggest military power on earth has witnessed mass grave where nameless people have been buried without the knowledge of the loved ones. The sheer number of deaths was unmanageable. Pandemic has dragged countries into desperation. Also, we are not certain when and how long this pandemic will affect us and to what extent. At the global level, conflicting opinions are pouring in with regard to the extent of the spread and the devastating effect of the virus. Some are even talking about the second or third wave of the virus. To me, these elements of one, universality, and two, uncertainty create a breeding ground of human anxiety leading to a deeper existential crisis. Many things exist in the world, but only humans can raise questions about his existence. This clearly sets humans apart from other things. Second, things exist means things can be used by humans to achieve some purpose. Humans at a certain level can also be said to exist as a means to achieve some goal, i.e., they have some instrumental existence. But this does not exhaust being of humans. Human existence transcends these means goal centric limit. If one looks at the direction of the unfolding of human civilization, it is clear that humans constantly try to move beyond instrumentality. Man certainly does not want to be a machine that is predetermined to act in a certain way. Man wants to exercise his own creativity in exploring the surrounding world, and in doing so, he also tries to understand himself more and more. This urge is universal and gets manifest in varieties of ways in all the human communities. The essence of man does not consist in any fixed characteristics. Rather, it is this perennial urge to extend the limit of oneself that characterizes man. Man is eternally discontent with what is given. This restlessness is the mark of humans. While perpetually standing in front of the ever expanding possibility of the horizon, man entertains the attitude of wonder, and from failures, he also focuses on his being. Man is the latest entry to the world. He is not satisfied with animal existence. His creative impulse makes him restless. This restlessness drives him to explore the nature in greater and greater detail. Science is the result of this attitude. Although science aims at being objective, it is a human enterprise. This objective inquiry is driven by man's unstoppable urge to open out new vistas. Philosophers of science, since Thomas Kuhn, have tried to argue that scientific enterprise is not free from extra scientific influences, and as a result of paradigm shift, it is difficult to make sense of comparing one scientific theory with another. The contents of scientific truths are free from man's influence, and so justification of such truths are also not dependent on human will, but the direction and contour of scientific enterprise is to a great extent determined by human interest and purpose. The explosion of atomic energy is certainly directed by human purpose. Nonetheless, the content of the laws of atomic theories are free from human intervention, and these laws could be justified without any reference to human interest. When scientists discovered the atomic energy, they were overwhelmed by the thought that this massively powerful energy could be used to serve good for humanity, or it could be used to destroy mankind. Theoretical exploration per se is neutral, but scientific theories are verified and justified in terms of their consequences, and the consequences certainly profoundly affect man. And this is where the existential crisis or the existential question crops up. If man exists not just to be manipulated as a machine, if man's urge to express himself in a varieties of ways is to be accounted for, then one has to take into account man's constant questioning his own being and the beings of others. Through this constant questioning, man's being is in constant flux. It is a process of becoming. But this process of becoming is not a linear process. The failures and letdowns are abundant in man's journey to becoming. But this has never stopped man from questioning and exploring his being. From disappointments and dissatisfactions, man stands up with greater vigor and resoluteness and proceeds with greater determination. This unending succession of triumphs and failures are expressions of man's attempt to understand his being. From the cave paintings to modern technological wonders, all these are manifestations of man's effort to understand his own existence. Since the dawn of civilization, every attempt of man to understand his being is fraught with crisis. He is making his own way out, not quite confident where the way would lead him to. But his insatiable thirst of moving ahead makes him find his way to meandering through the maze. Crisis appears following the urge to know or to act. It is a state of indecision. Indecision emerges from lack of certainty. An omniscient being does not suffer from uncertainty, nor does an animal, I believe, face a crisis. Man falls in between and so undergoes the crisis. Man finds himself in the world without any choice, so to say. But the uniqueness of man is that he does not remain content in finding himself in the world. Man is an animal, and so he has got his animal needs, for sure. But then man tries to transcend his animal needs. This excess element makes man question his being, and so the crisis is felt. When we talk of existential crisis, this crisis could be about the possible annihilation of our existence or about profound transformation of our existence. If death is certain, then embracing certainty looks obvious. But precisely here, the quandary begins. Being intellectually certain does not allay our apprehension. If death is not an event within life, for life ends in death, then conceptually life does not concern with death. Our fear of death comes out of our desire to live and also to lose our loved ones. In the face of pandemic, this fear gets heightened. There are two reasons behind this heightening. One, since we are fighting against an enemy, namely the virus, we are not sure when and where the virus will attack. The sudden and silent attack might bring in death. Death knocks at our door, so to say, as if it can call any one of us anytime. Life and all its projects could come to an end abruptly. Two, the emotional relation that we grow during the years with our loved ones seems severely threatened. When man is thrown into the world, he comes alone. But then he weaves bonds with people around him. His being gets inalienably associated with others. His life projects get intertwined with others. This generates social morality in its different aspects. It gets difficult to distinguish one's being from the beings of others. The arrival of pandemic quivers the entire form of web. and the possibility of unannounced arrival of death wobbles the otherwise stable being. In the absence of a definitive treatment, we are at loss. We suddenly are blinded like an animal caught in front of headlights of a car. This is crisis because we do not know how we got here, and also we do not know for certain how we can overcome this crisis. This is existential because we ponder over our beings, and our beings are related to beings of others. Thus, the entire human race gets threatened. We feel helpless because we find ourselves in this world and we are not given any choice. In our being, we construct our being in the process of becoming by relating us to fellow beings. Under lockdown and other restrictions, we are severed from other beings. Our movements have been severely restricted. It is getting difficult even to collect daily needs like food, etc. We are leading a life that is thrust upon us. But again, we try to console ourselves that this restriction is beneficial for us. Our familial relations are under strain. We feel there is a constant gaze of the state over our existence. Children are not allowed to go out. Students are not allowed to attend the educational institutions. Senior citizens are advised to confine them within their home. We do not entertain friends and guests at our home anymore. Everybody is maintaining social distance. Everybody is suspicious of everybody else. The other is treated as untouchable. The news media constantly pours in the statistics of infected people and death. The feeling generated is that we are all heading towards doomsday. The human mind cries, why all this? No answer is available at macro level. Clinically, people can have an existential crisis when they start questioning what life means and what is the purpose of life as a whole. For the salaried middle class, at least in India, the pandemic produces a guilt since a large number of people in our unorganized sector faces tremendous problems, sometimes leading to death, while the salaried middle class is more or less unaffected. I could have been one of these people walking down the railway track to return home and then got killed in a train accident. This kind of thought is deeply unsettling for me and for my near and dear ones. It is a series of accidental events that puts me in a comfortable situation where I am today. And we all know things in life can change dramatically, even without giving a hint of the upcoming changes. The fear of losing a loved one or facing the reality of one's own death is very scary indeed. The visuals that are portrayed in the news media generates the fear of death that hovers over us constantly. We are all familiar with the event of death, but the pandemic intensifies this fear because of its all pervading tentacles and uncertainty of time of attack. It comes with a whisper and stifles us within days. Man has been struggling with the idea of death since time immemorial. During the pandemic, this struggle becomes too real and overpowering. There are statistics to suggest that lockdown has increased domestic violence, feeling of loneliness. Though it has been a cliche that man is a social animal, the significance of this cliche has been realized by all of us when we were told to be confined within our homes for months. Communicating with others, sharing one's space, feelings, and frustrations, or telling others one's own little experiences that are otherwise insignificant also makes one's existence lighter to carry. Inability to do this turns people restless. Loneliness could be excruciatingly painful. Senior citizens living on their own are witness to this. The universality of the threat of pandemic, coupled with the looming uncertainty of life, leads man to ask about the nature of his own existence. The very attempt to raise this question is a silver line. Since the more committed and sincere we are in our attempt to explore our being, the more our becoming will flourish. No doubt, grief and agony will accompany us all the way, but this pain and suffering will churn out new ways of becoming. Man's creativity will thrive in thousand ways. Man's figure cannot be removed from the altar of the just repeat temple of civilization. To suffer is to become. To become is to free oneself from the fetter of the immediate given. And perhaps then man can sing, "Blessed was the pain, blessed was the throbbing." To exist is to suffer, and to suffer is a privilege that humans possess. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, sir, for sharing such useful information and thoughtful interpretations on today's topic. It was not only uprising, but equally engrossing. Thank you so much,
Thank
sir. Now, to proceed with, I would like to introduce Ms. Anchita Ghatak, the Director of Parichiti India. Ms. Anchita Ghatak is the Secretary of Parichiti, a society for empowerment of women and an independent consultant on gender and women's rights, child rights, labor rights, policy reform, and health. She was also a part of the group of activists that initiated Maitri, a women's rights network in 1995 and 1996. Ms. Anchita Ghatak has also incubated a program called Kolkata Initiatives, which promotes local philanthropy and works with elderly women in slums. She works as an independent consultant for research, training, and evaluation. Working as a literary translator, she has translated Doyamoir Kotha by Sunanda Shikdar from Bengali to English and Taslima Nasrin's Lajja. She has been a part of various projects on rights of women domestic workers, education of girls, and women's safety and mobility. She is working with Delta's Vulnerability and Climate Change, Migration and Adaptation India to ensure that gender is incorporated in its workings. It will be a privilege to listen to her exalted lecture on today's topic. In the meantime, as she will be presenting her views, we will be welcoming questions from the participants, to which she will be responding after the lecture. So all of you are requested to drop your questions on the comment section. Over to you, ma'am. Ma'am, you have to unmute it. We can't hear you.
Oh, sorry.
It's
Good
fine.
morning.
Good morning, ma'am.
I'm very happy to be here today, and my thanks go out to Rabindra Bharati University, especially to the Department of Disability Studies and the Department of Human Rights. It's always a strange feeling for me whenever I speak at these webinars, because there's no eye contact with the audience, so it's a little bit unnerving, like Professor Chakraborty was just telling us that these are strange times we are living in. I will speak a bit about women and the pandemic. Um, do I have some idea? I mean, how much time do I have? Can anyone tell me how
Ma'am,
much
you have,
time?
yeah, sure, ma'am. Actually, ma'am, you're having half an hour, so you can just go on with
Okay,
as much
so
as you
maybe
want.
you'll
Yeah.
have to buzz me 5 minutes before when you want me to start winding
No,
up.
ma'am, we are more willing to hear you. Sure, ma'am. Over to
Okay,
you, ma'am.
okay. When we start, one of the first questions we need to look at is whom are we talking about when we say women? Because all along, I mean, when we talk about women for a long time, people like me, for instance, have always thought about cis women. But now we know that the identity of women is no longer confined only to cis women. It includes trans women and it includes non-binary persons who may identify as women. So this is, I think, something we need to remember because language is still very limited, and very often when we speak we fall into this, talk in binaries of men and women. So, and I'm sure I'll also make that mistake several times today. But I would like all of us to keep in mind that the term women is, encompasses a large section of people and is not confined only to cis women. And the big question before us today then is, why are we talking about women in relation to the pandemic? We're talking about women because gender matters, and different and we know that different kinds of inequalities and marginalization have got exacerbated during the pandemic. This is not to say that the pandemic in itself has brought about these inequalities. What has actually happened is inequalities were existing in society, and those have got heightened under these very difficult circumstances. And this has happened across the world. And in fact, the other day I was reading something which said that, we are saying that it has affected rich and poor alike, but that's not true because the very rich, have got richer. So that perspective also exists, and those are things that we need to look at. Um, Also, when we talk about gender, we need to remember that gender doesn't work in a vacuum, but it combines with other categories of social relations like caste, class, religion, disability, ethnicity, age, and so on. And the term for this, the very sort of term that's become popular now, is the term intersectionality, that all come together. So, for example, a if you're a young Dalit adolescent girl in India, you are likely to be a lot more marginalized than an upper caste university educated woman in India. I mean, to put it, very simply. And and when we say gender matters, it's important to remember that where the UNHDR, the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights, came about in 1948, and in 1979 we had CEDAW, which is known as, which is generally accepted as a Bill of Rights for women. So why did CEDAW come about? Because this I think is important to understand, that people realize that though human rights were supposed to be universal, but man and human somehow were getting identified because of another word, the androcentric nature of language and society. So men were put at the center and women were being left out. So CEDAW is in 1979. And then in 1993, 45 years after the UNHDR, we have the Declaration and the Vienna Conference of Human Rights, where it is very clearly said that women's rights are human rights. So it's not as though women automatically got all the advantages of human rights. It's again something that women had to struggle for. And this is important to remember. And while we are looking at this, I think it's also necessary to spread our, to sort of spread our gaze a little wider and think of and look at a few other statistics. So, it over 500,000 women continue to die each year from pregnancy and childbirth related causes. Rates of HIV infection among women, now over the past few years, especially in India, we've barely heard of HIV, but it's still there. And rates of HIV infection among women are rapidly increasing. Among those in the 15 to 24 years of age, young women across the world now constitute the majority of those newly infected, in part because of their economic and social vulnerability. Gender-based violence kills and disables as many women between the ages of 15 and 44 as cancer. More often than not, perpetrators go unpunished. Worldwide, women are twice as likely as men to be illiterate. In India, our total literacy rate is 82.14%, according to our latest census. And the male literacy is 74.04%, and the female literacy is 65.46%. So here we have a big gap, as we can see. As a consequence of their working conditions, a disproportionate number of women are impoverished in both developing and developed countries. Despite some progress in women's wages in the 1990s, women still earn less than men, even for similar kinds of work. Many of the countries that CEDAW still have discriminatory laws governing marriage, land, property, and inheritance. In India, we know what a struggle it is for women to get their property rights. Hindu women who have the law on their side, culturally they get left out. So it's always a very complicated issue about how many institutions you have to negotiate to get your rights. And today, as I speak, I will talk about this, the condition of women domestic workers in India. Let us look at what happened in India when the pandemic started. The first case of COVID-19 was detected in India in January. And through January and February, we didn't really hear very much about precautions to take, what was happening. For most of us in India, it was like something happening far away. It's happening in China. Maybe it will affect Southeast Asia. But we were not really sort of particularly concerned. And we didn't hear too much from the government either. And from March, from the beginning of March, it's we started hearing certain murmurs, and we started asking, oh, should we all be wearing masks, and what's going on? We didn't hear too much about preparations by the government, except in Kerala, where we know that the health minister there took the WHO advice of test, trace, isolate, and support very seriously, because Kerala also had the previous experience of the Nipah virus. And they knew that they have to really, get going. But from March, and then what happened then in March? In March, we had this sudden lockdown. I mean, most of us, I think, were absolutely unprepared, and we didn't know what to expect. I mean, when the lockdown was declared in March, we everyone at that time, all the talk was around 31st of March, as though within a week everything would get sorted. And although the lockdown, even when it was first declared, the lockdown was declared for 21 days. But we were totally, I think, people themselves and the government, everyone was totally at sea. But gradually, more and more we started hearing about things. Then the government announced relief packages, and the foremost among them being the Pradhan Mantri Garib Kalyan scheme, to cover 80 crore poor people and provide cash transfers and food security. And the government of West Bengal also declared certain measures. And one of them was that, for priority households, people with priority ration cards, they were going to be provided with free rations, which the state government, the central government had also declared and said that that would happen till November 2020, and then the government of West Bengal has extended that to June 2021. One of the things that we have been hearing about, before I go on to my next section on domestic workers, I think it's important to talk a bit about domestic violence, because this is something we have been hearing about across the world, what is being called the silent pandemic. Because one of the major features of the pandemic is that we are all in our homes. I mean, even today, I think most of us here are sitting in our homes and reaching out to people across the world. And women found themselves locked in their houses, and in many cases with their abusers, and which in a large number of cases were their intimate partners, intimate male partners. And domestic violence became rampant across the world. Helplines have reported that they were getting more calls. Here in India, we've had the experience of women feeling locked into their houses and unable to even reach out. I mean, that has also been very difficult, because you're in the space always with the people who are who've put you under surveillance all the time. And women have reported uh, definitely physical violence, sexual violence, and of course mental and psychological violence. And in this connection, it is also important to remember that women's burden of household work has increased. And again, across the world, women have found that they are having to do even more housework than they usually do. Which is not to say that household chores are not being shared by other people in the family, in every family, but that is happening, of course. But in many cases, it's not happening. In Porichiti, in Calcutta, we've had some very frightening experiences. I mean, there is marital violence where women are talking about violence from their husbands. And there have also been cases where women are, I mean, they're literally trapped, because sometimes they would go to work, or even when they've been able to contact helplines, they haven't been able to get the help because there's been no transport, movements are restricted. So these problems have been there. And another feature that we found in during the pandemic, and is that Porichiti does not work with middle class women, but we got contacted by several middle class women, because no, and they really complained a lot about emotional abuse. And in many cases, because their office work or all their professional work, but the burden of household work was increasing. And the women who are full-time homemakers, they said that the demands on them were very, very high because everybody was at home. And and another interesting thing to remember is that in the early months of the pandemic, during the lockdown, many middle class homes were without domestic help. So this was also adding to the burden of work on women. And the other thing that we had in, we got reports. I mean, we were contacted by friends, people we know about single women who live with parents or other family members, and the kind of abuse they were facing. A young woman called me. She works as a teacher, and she lived in this. This I'm talking about this, but there were several such examples that they were, she was living with her mother, who's always been very abusive. And she says, now I don't even have the option. She's a teacher, so she goes to school to teach, but now all her teaching was happening at home, and she was constantly with this very abusive parent. And she'd got a job outside Calcutta, but she had not been able to go to that place. And she was working from home, and it had just increased the abuse and her sense of helplessness, because she was having, and she couldn't even call from home. She was going out of the house to make her phone calls to us. We also had this experience. We were contacted by a woman from another district, well, a woman and her husband, who again were being abused by the man's mother. She really needed people to stand by her, but even some of the local help that she had, local supporters, again, because of the pandemic, they were unable to reach her. She needed some other support which she needed from Calcutta. So our counselor who was speaking to her was again feeling frustrated because she could not go. She had no transport that would take her to that place. So all it's really been a tough time for women. Of course, one organization in Calcutta that works solely on violence against women, we referred many of the women who called us to this organization, and they were running a helpline so that women could talk to them, reach out to them. So, and that's where we referred women, and things are a little better now that everything has opened up much more. But this silent pandemic is always there, and it's important for us to take note of it. So this whole question of stay safe, stay at home, when we think of women and the pandemic, this is a big question we have to ask ourselves, whether home is always safe, and what is our understanding of this safety. And during the pandemic, another big discussion that has happened, because those of us who work with domestic workers, we always say that women domestic workers are there in private conversation. But this time we found that yes, they were there very much part of the public conversation. And because middle class households were really affected. I mean, this is probably the first time, at least in my lifetime, I have never seen such a situation where for weeks on end um, middle class homes go without domestic workers. And domestic workers too have never experienced this thing, staying at home day after day. Initially it was nice, it was good to get some respite from work. but it gradually became a very trying time for them. So, we heard a lot during the pandemic. All of us heard about the plight of migrant workers and what happened. And uh, but it was not only migrant workers who were affected. The entire informal economy was affected. And I think we need to remember that even if we are very conservative, we can say that 80% of India's employed people work in the informal sector. And when we think of domestic workers who are there all over, there are no definite statistics as to how many women. And this is, again, I'm saying women because this is a profession, or this is a trade that is dominated by women. And the numbers are, they really vary. There are various estimates. For instance, the NSS survey of 2005 says there are 4.75 million domestic workers in India. But there are different estimates, and through different sources, and the estimates go up to 90 million women or 90 million people working as domestic workers. But a study conducted by SEWA tells us that it is safe to assume that there are at least 50 million domestic workers in India, and most of them are women, many are girls as well. Now, when the pandemic started, we were talking to domestic workers, and because we work with domestic workers in many areas in Kolkata and South 24 Parganas. And in the beginning of April, we heard, because when the lockdown came, then there was this thing that everyone has to stay at home, no one can go out. People were also scared, and domestic workers stayed home. And but as the month ended, they were getting anxious about getting their wages, about when they would be able to go to work again. And then early April, we heard from most domestic workers that they had got their wages, but they had got their wages for March. And in fact, there were some very good stories, like we heard of this housing complex where they actually made an effort to collect wages. They spoke to the local, it was a big gated community. They spoke to the local police station. They made sure all the workers on their campus, so construction workers, domestic workers, all of them got their wages were sent to them. Provisions were made for workers who were staying on campus, etc. And but of course, there were constant questions, and we were also all wondering, when will we be able to go back to work? How will the world function, etc. But from early May, we started getting a very different picture. And how were we contacting the women we work with? Because we were also, normally we go into the community and we work with them. But we were not able to do that now. So this was becoming a major issue for us, that how do we reach out to people when they are in trouble? So we started distributing relief. It took some time to do that, finding out, but everything was being done on the phone. We were able to contact many domestic workers on the phone, but we couldn't contact everybody that we work with, because not everyone has a phone. But from May, we started hearing that uncertainties were very high. Some women had already been told by their employers that they'd lost their jobs. Some others who were, there was a lot of uncertainty around jobs and income. And then, from early May, we heard that many had been told that they were not going to get any wages for April. And so, so we then started thinking about, as we started getting information, we also, and we had begun distributing relief because we'd got in touch with communities. We were asking women to make lists about who really needed relief, because food shortages were staring people in the face. They were not able to go to work. There was no money. How do you buy food? And so we could, when we went to distribute relief, we could speak to the women, with precautions. I mean, it was a really challenging, even organizing the relief distribution. Everything had to be done on the phone. So, and finally, of course, we would go there and distribute relief, and that allowed us to have distanced face-to-face contact. And so then we thought, well, we need to see what's going on. And we also started telling the women that, see, those of you who have phones or access to phones, please start contacting your employers and asking directly about wages, about work, because it's not as though you're not going to work because you don't want to. You're not going to work because you're not able to. And also there were employers who were telling them that, please don't come now. We are not allowing anyone into our houses. So it was happening from all sides. So from, then we decided to do a pilot study, and we interviewed 14 women who live either in Kolkata or in South 24 Parganas, and I'll share the findings of that study with you, and to get some idea of what domestic workers have faced, what has happened. So, like I said, that all of them got paid for March, and from mid-May, gradually domestic workers started going back to work, and then so that's when we decided that since they were going back to work, everything was opening up. This is the best time to try and document some of the experiences of these women. So we spoke to 14 women. The interviews were all conducted by phone because, again, face-to-face interviews were not possible. And so we found that some of the 14 women we interviewed, some went back to work from May, and the others all started going back from June. It's important to remember that all these women had multiple jobs, but they got some jobs. They got some jobs, and but they didn't get back all their jobs, and so there was a shortage of income, there was uncertainty, and we must remember that it wasn't only the women who were losing the jobs. Men too had lost jobs, and in the same family, you see, because where the woman is a domestic worker, the man is also usually working in the informal sector and working either as a rickshaw puller, an electrician, a plumber, a van driver, different kinds of jobs, and they were all they had all lost their jobs, and many were in debt, and they had borrowed money from relatives, from employers. Some already had bank loans. I mean, there was this woman who had taken a large loan from the bank to help finance her husband's business. Her husband works as a cook. He gets invited to cook for functions, etc., and normally he makes good money, but he was also out of a job. This woman's son, who has a job, he also was out of a job at that time. So even paying back that loan became very difficult for them. And when they went back to work, conditions had changed. One is what we found from the women is that they were well aware of, the coronavirus and what kind of precautions to take, and they were taking these precautions in their homes and also in their workplaces. So many said when they went back to work, they were washing their hands. One woman told us that she works in 3 different houses, and in each of these, she had left. She used to leave a fresh set of clothes, and so she would go there, change, wash her hands, etc. And a lot. Many of the housing complexes also, at the gate itself, they were providing them sanitizers. So they would sanitize their hands, go in and do, start work. But like I said, that, inequalities got exacerbated during the pandemic. So while the women were happy with restrictions, which they saw as restrictions, and part of the precautions that they were already taking at home, but some also reported very painful experiences in the workplace. One woman said that in the house where she worked, she had been forbidden from touching the little baby in the house, who was, well, not a baby, but a toddler who was 2-3 years old, someone she had seen from the time that the baby had been born. And she was forbidden to touch the child. Then she also saw that whatever she touched was again being cleaned by her employers. So it was like untouchability practices were getting heightened. And the other big problem that they saw, that is even getting any kind of healthcare support was becoming very difficult. In any case, government health services, most of them are, whenever they can, if they're in a hurry, they try and use the private health services that are provided, because they feel that that's faster, and the government health services take too long, etc. And but even finding healthcare services was difficult. And wherever they went, whether government or private, there was always the fear of catching the infection. So that was there. And rations through the public distribution system, though the government had announced many schemes, but again, many of them found that this was inaccessible. Then a lot of times their paperwork is not in order, but at other times, because of their income, they're able to access, they buy food from the open market. But this time it was getting difficult, and there was corruption in the services. So all this made things very, very difficult for them. And one very, very characteristic of Kolkata, because many domestic workers, this was very interesting, that about the transport, because local trains were not running. I mean, we know local trains in Kolkata, local train services have, the suburban train services have just about resumed. And but for a large part, I mean, definitely during the lockdown, and even as the economy was opening, other forms of public transport were few and far between. Again, employers were afraid that if domestic workers came by public transport, they would be transmitting infections. So they were reluctant to take such domestic workers back. But one woman we know whom we interviewed, She lives in the suburbs of the city. And when she saw that the trains were not running, but she wanted to go back to work, um, she said she would cycle to work. She knew she had a bicycle, and so it was a 1 hour bike ride one way. And she said initially it was very tiring, but uh, initially it was tiring, but she managed to do it. And now she feels that rather than depend on the state transport, she would much rather travel on her bike, because it gives her much more flexibility. So to wind up, I mean, this is the situation, but what's going to happen? What are we going to do? So we need to look for solutions, and who are the people who can provide these solutions? We feel employers have a role to play, because employers can see that they have fair practices uh, uh, when they employ domestic workers. So some of the things we are suggesting is that they ensure that they pay domestic workers at least 45 rupees per hour. They see that domestic workers get 1 day off in the week. Uh, um, Domestic workers are enrolled in the health insurance schemes, and domestic workers can, and they're also entitled to maternity leave. On behalf of the state, we think that the state should incorporate domestic workers in the minimum wage schedule, and also ensure that um, and also see that they are declared as essential workers. Do I have time, or would you just like me to wind up now?
Yeah, sorry, ma'am, to interrupt you in between, but actually, we have some questions for you, which we will be attending after the end of the session. So we have presenters lined up, so they will be, I mean, presenting first, and then I will ask you the questions, and you can answer to participants. Is that okay with ma'am?
Okay, so can I get 2 minutes to wind up?
Yeah, sure. All yours.
Okay. Okay. And we also feel that women's organizations and NGOs have a role in ensuring that that employers, representatives of employers and representatives of domestic workers meet periodically, and they can have discussions to see that how they can best resolve issues, and how domestic workers' rights can be um, supported and promoted. Uh, we also feel that women's organizations should stand by domestic workers, help them build their own organizations, so that they are in a position to demand their rights both individually and collectively. And of course, there is no denying that state services have to reach domestic workers and other poor people far more efficiently. There are health services that are there, PDS services, housing. All of this has to look at the rights of all informal workers, including domestic workers. And research is always important to support any kind of movement, to support any kind of social change. And we feel women informal workers need to be more. And yes, so I'll end here, because our study, of course, when I talked about there are many other aspects of lives of women and domestic workers, which this study did not cover. We were mainly looking at their situation in the workplace, and much needs to be done. And the other thing which now is everybody's lives, and this is something that the
Thank you, ma'am. On the behalf of the Department of Disability Studies and the Department of Human Rights and Human Development, I would like to thank you, ma'am, for edifying us on the issue which has been a major concern for quite a long time now. It was surely thought provoking and something to work upon. I would now like to request you to begin the first half of today's session as the chairperson. Over to you, ma'am. Ma'am, we have the first presenter today, Mr. Parthisarathy Sharkar, the researcher. Sorry for the interruption. I will repeat again. Today's first presentation is from Mr. Parthisarathy Sarkar, the researcher of Indira Gandhi National Open University, West Bengal, India. His research paper is Ethics and Law, a study on womanish living in rural urban continuum of India in COVID-19 situation. Over to you, ma'am, and over to you, sir.
So, with your kind permission, I'm just starting my presentation here. So, I am just telling about the woman. And according to the Sumanta Behura, it was told that a woman is not born, but rather it becomes a woman. So, in this situation, we think that women are not just only of the sex, but it is of the social consideration how some people are considering the other. And from that perspective, we can see that she wrote a book, namely The Second Sex. That means they can never be the first one, as because they are carrying the second sex. So, with that, I just like to come to my first slide, the title slide. The first slide, please. The, yeah. So, here I just like to say about the ethics and law, which are two important factors in any society to develop a human and the related things. So, whenever those two cannot be much effective for any community, then that community must not get any proper development at any case. And from that perspective, I just like to see what is the situation of the rural and urban places in the time of the COVID 19. As because, as I have mentioned in the second slide, is next. Next. Yeah. So, as next means the second, ma'am. Second one. Yeah. So, as per the quotation, we can think that women have a lot of talents as because they are considering the household chores as well as the out of home works as well. So, it needs some definite potentialities and capacities which makes a total formation of the talent, but they are not considered as that much talented as because they wear a skirt in the the western countries, And in India, they are wearing a salwar or a the shari. So they are always considered with those items. Even we can see that in some incidents, we have already seen that some teachers, some good officials are getting that kind of situation when they were just forced to wear some kind of clothes during their official activities. So it is the sex which has to be seen from the gender's perspective now to help the growth of the nation, as because Swami Vivekananda told, the male and the female are just like two wings of a single bird. So if the women cannot make any development in their lives, then the total development process of the whole nation can be interrupted. So with that, I just like to go to the third slide. Third slide, please. Yeah. So here my argument is relating to the human society, where I just like to see what the possibility of the corona on the gender perspective. As because there is already a pandemic where the women are always getting low, always making their lives in some downward situation. They are always getting threat even they are educated and they are well established as well, as because that whenever our in our households one husband is coming from his job and one wife is coming from his job, the woman has to make the tea to the men, and then the men enjoy. Otherwise the society will make some points that see the women are not doing the things and they are not helping the husband and a lot of things. So we can see that even in a same situation, the male and the female are treated not equally. Even they are getting same kind of jobs, they are getting same kind of education and all the things. But the tradition has to be broken first. But it is continuing. And how can the corona situation be further be much effective on those has to be seen. And being a researcher in the social science, we must take care of it. The next slide, please. So, as per the review of literature, we can see that India can adopt the Epidemic Diseases Act, which was passed in the year 1897. And it has made some guidelines in the society where you can see that a pandemic situation is affecting directly upon the economy. And if the economy is broken down, then the gender perspective is much more affected, as because a woman can lose her job, and when a woman is losing her job, there was a question in the chat box, as I have already seen, that how not the men can be seen in that distress. Yes, because a male should not be checked by the society and they will not be called like, oh, see that man has lost the job or anything else. We always be much sorrowful to see a male who has not a job. But when a female has not any job, then the society will say that, see, woman has no right to job. So if there is no job for a woman, then it's all right, no problem at all. So it is the total consideration of the society which is driving a household as well. And from that perspective, we can see that woman has to be seen from that ground. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Hmm. So the objectives, as I have already told, the women have to be seen from the perspective of the corona situation in respect to the male. And there is some study limitation, as because a researcher, if I'm considering myself as a researcher, then I could not go to the field. I could not make any direct interview of the woman. And I had to means the total sample size keep into a very small one. Like I have taken only 20 samples out from the Kolkata and 20 from the Fulia, which is in the Nodia district in a rural situation. So the sampling frame is of only 20. So it cannot make a very broad and clear picture, but we can make an understanding on it. So I have tried that only. Next slide. So the study need, as I have already mentioned, the if the women are not getting any kind of development, then the total society will be disrupted, and the total development will be in a totally negative situation. And the negative situation will further be much effective on the condition of the nation to go back in a very backwarded situation. So we have to take care for the potential growth of the women, not only for them, but for the whole of the nation. Next slide, please. So I have considered a continuum in the perspective or the aspect of the urban and rural, as because it is always possible that women are always bad treated in every situation, but some differences can be seen in the urban and the rural as because the cultures are different. So I have considered Hulia and different places, means I have taken samples from Bhakuria, Lake Town, and Baliganj of total 20. I did phone calls to them with a previously made questionnaire, and I asked some questions from them. They have answered those, and I have further made some graphs on their answers to see what is the differences between a rural and an urban place. Next slide, please. So, understanding gender by the woman, as I have already mentioned, that in every society the gender differences are persisting. So, how the women are facing their lives, I have tried to see. And I have seen that urban women are making much development in their mindsets to see their conditions. So, the urban development is happening. And if we are considering the rural places, then the women are still not aware about their present situation or condition. So the development is much slow in the rural places. So the rural places can give women a complete atrocity in their lives when the chance or the risk in the urban places can be much reduced as because they are much aware about themselves. Next slide. How the gender is continuing. If that gender is that much problematic, and if the women are just really getting that much problem, then how the gender is continuing? I have seen that the women are not at all much careful to make their situation some better. So if a person is not asking some betterment in her life, then no one will give any kind of solution to them, as because no one cares for those persons who are not at all aware to make themselves developed. And due to the traditional culture and various other factors, the women are thinking that okay, it's all right if we are living in some atrocities, as because the society is continuing. So the society is continuing, but their development is interrupted, but they are not feeling it. So we have to be much careful to make them alert about their situations, and then only a positive growth is possible. Otherwise, no development plan or procedure can be that much helpful, which is needed now. So the next slide. Next slide, please. Household condition for the women in Corona. As because we have seen that all the persons were means totally in the home, and they could not go out of the home, and they could not go for any places, especially very much time when I took the samples in between the May to June, and the government made a lockdown period at that time. Then the women were facing much critical situations by staying in home, and they were pointing it out. But when I asked them what can be the best possible solution for those situations, then hardly some of the women could tell that we have to protest or we have to uh, at, a- attract the attention of the male or the counterparts or the other household members so that we can get a positive living. So it is a situation when the women are getting problem by staying in home. They were getting problem from the previous situation as well, but they are still trying to be adopted with the conditions. So the positive growth or the development which I am mentioning repeatedly is not at all possible for them, even after interacting with the NGOs like yours and interacting with the government officials, but they are not at all aware about their rights, about their process of development. So a development is not at all possible for them. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So existing health conditions of the woman. I have tried to see if the women are getting any kind of illness, like a menstruation is a very regular thing with them. And if they are getting some fever or some kind of other diseases, then will they get any kind of rest when their male counterparts are doing their activities, means cooking or uh, cleaning the houses or taking care of the children or the elderly? Then I have seen that in the rural places, the women are in much pressure than in the urban because the urban male are much helpful to the woman. And if we are considering the rural places, then we can see that the males are not at all helpful for the woman. The next slide, please. So, if these conditions are persisting with them, then they have to take care not only from the societal perspective but also from the legal perspective as well. But I have seen that the women are not at all much known to the legal procedures. And if at least knowledge is there about the legal aspect, then also they are not going to the legal authorities by making several ideas that they will not be treated well or they will not get much help or anything else like those. They are just stopping themselves to go to the legal authorities. So the atrocities are just continuing with them, even in the situation of the corona, when the Epidemic Act is activated and the women could get much help from the legal, but they are not going to those.
Hello.
Next, the next slide, please.
Yes,
The
because
next
it's
slide.
not a question, it's an opinion that
Huh? Are you saying something to me? Next slide, please. So, if we are making the study as a total understanding about the situation, then we can see the condition of the women are much aggravated now due to the corona, and there is some ethical perspective and legal guidelines as well for the women, but they must come to those. Otherwise, those cannot be much helpful for them, and they will not get any kind of solution out of those. Next slide, please. So here I have suggested that the women should be alerted. They will be well learned with the legal helps and how the social aspect can be changed, and a positive living can make them in a situation of being developed. So the other parts of them, means the male, should be known about the capacities of the woman, and there will be much cooperative with the woman, then only a good situation will come. Next slide. So here I have mentioned about my references. Next slide. The next slide, Mr. Thank you slide was there. So with the presentation here, I am just trying to say about the woman as I have already mentioned. And if there is any question to me, you may point it out after my presentation. And with your kind permission, I am just ending here. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sarkar, for your presentation. Muhammad Mohiuddin has a comment.
Okay.
He is saying that in this patriarchal society, the problems of men are not addressed, and Corona has shown that men too are vulnerable. So, would you have a comment?
Yeah, it's a really good comment from him, and I just like to confirm him that his point of view is totally right. But if we are considering a male, as I have already mentioned, that if a male is losing his job, then a society will be much sorrowful rather to say, oh, say that the man has lost a job or anything else. But if a female is losing her job, then the society will call, oh, what is the problem with it? If the male is getting some earning, then it's all right because a family needs some amount of good earning in these days. But if the female is not getting any kind of good amount in her life, then also family can continue. As because you just see that even after giving birth of a child or getting some problem in after the marriage life, the male has to continue with his job, but a female has to lost his job. So it is the situation and it is the tradition of society, especially which is from a very the developing country, and it is not still a developed nation as well, and the tradition is continuing to see the female as some downgraded, as because Simone de Beauvoir, with whom I started my presentation, said the second sex. So women are the secondary. Women are the second. So they have much more atrocities than a male. But definitely, if losing a job by a male, then it's really a problematic thing. And the situation is creating this situation, means the condition with the male and female both. But the conditions with female and the male are totally different. So we have to see the female first and then the male. But we cannot ever say that okay, we don't have any need to see about the male because they also have some need and they also have some problems in their lives, but they are not the secondary, they are the primary. So a primary can be seen after a few words, but a secondary has to be taken care at the very beginning of any kind of development. So that's my answer. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's important for all of us to understand that it's not a competition between men and women, and it's also important to recognize the vulnerabilities of men. At the same time, one should also be aware that there is a differential in power between men and women. Thank you. Are we ready for the second speaker?
Yes, ma'am. Okay, so our next presenter is Dr. Sujit Ghosh, Assistant Professor of Bajkul Milani Mahavidyalaya, West Bengal, India. He will be presenting paper Women's Reservation in Panchayats, Beginning of a New Era. Over to you, sir.
Hello, ma'am. Am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, welcome. Yes, you're audible. Yes, yes, we are waiting to hear you.
At first, I convey my respect to the honorable chairpersons in this technical session.
Sorry to interrupt you in between.
You okay?
Just a friendly reminder to all the participants, including that we are having this strict time duration of 7 minutes, and we are requesting you to please stick to that because we have all the presenters today. And so please, good luck and just stick to the time. Thank you.
Okay, ma'am. I convey my respect to the honorable chairpersons in these technical sessions. Hello, ma'am. I am Dr. Sujit Ghosh, Assistant Professor, Department of Political Science, Batskul Miloni Mahavidyalay, Purva Midnapur. My title of the paper is Women Reservations in Panchayats, Beginning of a New Era. Subordinations of women is a fundamental feature of the patriarchal society. In the equation of power formulations in every sphere, from family to state, women have been offered very marginal role to play. But gender equality and also their meaningful participation in the political decision-making process is utmost essential for the success of democracy in any state of the world. Well, the constitutions of India provides equal rights and opportunities to the women at par with men, but the policy of equality virtually failed to motivate women in politics. In such a situations, the policymakers of India take the affirmative action in the form of reservations of seats for women in the urban and local self-governing bodies. This paper, based on secondary data, attempts to assess the participations of women in local decision-making process through panchayats and also to analyze the impact of this process on rural society in India. In fact, India is a nation of villages. The bulk of marginalized women live in villages, and the politics of deprivations also start from here. To improve the situation, 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act was passed, which recognized panchayat as institutions of self-government and also introduced the provisions of women reservations along with other things in those local self-governing bodies. It is provided in the act that not less than one-third, including the women from SC and STs, of the total seats to be filled by the direct elections in every tier of panchayat shall be reserved for the women, and such seats may be allotted by rotation to different constituencies in each tier of panchayats. The act also provides for reservations of one-third of the total number of offices of chairpersons in panchayat at all tiers, and such offices of chairpersons shall be allotted by rotation to different panchayats at each level. However, in the post-73rd Constitutional Amendment Act phase, 19 Indian states have reserved 50% of the total states and offices of chairpersons in panchayats for women through amending their respective Panchayati Raj Acts. Thus, at present, there are approximately 13.45 lakh elected women panchayat representatives across the different states in our country, and it consists of 46.14% of the total elected panchayat representatives. The experiment of women empowerment of such magnitude is really peerless in the world. Actually, the reservations of seats and the offices of chairperson in panchayat bodies for women have opened unique possibility for women's meaningful participations in the process of authoritative allocations of values for the village society in India. It is true that all forms of political participation do not necessarily lead to the empowerment of women in society. Only active participations on the part of the women in the local decision-making process through panchayats can ensure their empowerment in society. A large number of studies have been conducted to review the performance of women as member of or chairpersons in panchayats in different states in India. These studies reveal both sides, success as well as failure. With the active participations of women in panchayats, a process of change in the content and style of functioning of panchayat is also noticed. Now they are found to put emphasis on the issues like rural health, drinking water, education, and also the issues of alcoholism, domestic violence, etc., which directly affect the interest of the common villagers in general and the interest of the women's community in particular. Different studies show that the interest of women in politics is increasingly growing on in the post-73rd Constitutional Amendment Act period. Many highly educated women leaving their attractive professional careers are joining in politics and have made their mark in bringing positive changes in their respective area as panchayat representatives. Studying the functioning of elected panchayat representatives in many panchayats, Patnaik has commented that it is clear that women's leadership in panchayats is transforming India. These elected women, now role model to the other women in their communities, are altering the development agenda to address issues critical to village life. The success stories number in millions. Women throughout India, from Odisha to Assam to Uttar Pradesh to Bihar, are ensuring that roads are repaired, electricity is brought to their villages, schools are built, latrines installed, medical services are available, water sources are made safe, and the list goes on and on. Side by side, there are many factors which often prevent women from taking decisions independently in panchayats. Patriarchal culture and the hierarchical social structure are still dominated in rural India. Till now, many families do not ready to accept women as active participants in panchayat or public domain. Lack of literacy and knowledge among women is another important obstacle. Generally, most of the elected women panchayats members enter into the public domain for the first time, and generally they depend on their male relatives in discharging their assigned duties. Thus, after the enactment of the 73rd Constitutional Amendment Act, we see to develop some new idioms in the political discourses such as Sarpanchpati, Pradhanpati, which necessarily signify the passivity and incapability of women panchayat representatives regarding administering the panchayat affairs. In fact, panchayat as a
Sorry
form of
to
local
interrupt you,
self-government.
sir,
Okay,
but you have only 1 minute to wrap it up. So all the best.
okay, ma'am. What I say, panchayat as a form of local self-government is very weak in India. They severely suffer from enjoying autonomy in the form of fund, functions, and functionaries. As a result, women as panchayat leaders perform their assigned duties within a lot of limitations. In East Bengal, women panchayat leaders face another important barrier from their respective local political leaders. In an empirical research study, the authors see the interventions of the local leaders in the functioning of the Gram Panchayat members, both men and women. In fact, this type of interventions cut roots of the goal, women's reservation, to empower the rural women. In conclusions, we may say that the reservations of seats for women in Panchayat Raj institutions has brought a significant change in the representations and participations of women in local decision-making process. It helps to bring about a positive change in the dignity and status of the common women in rural society. Now they are getting more autonomy in comparison to their earlier days in their private as well as public life. But we have to go much more ahead to have a major shift on the road to women empowerment through their participations in panchayat in our rural society. However, several steps such as women literacy, consecutive training program may be taken to increase their functional efficiency and effectiveness. Government should also take initiative to involve civil society organizations, women group, academic institutions such as Centers for Women Studies in the process of capacity building of women panchayat representatives. At last but not least, we say that a political commitment on the part of the state government to develop panchayat as institutions of self-government in a real sense of the term is also necessary in this regard. They must sufficiently develop functions and functionaries to the panchayat based on democratic decentralization of power so that women panchayat representatives can get full opportunity to implement their own agenda and administering the village affairs and able to create a village society based on gender equality and justice. Thank you. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you so much, sir. Ma'am
Do
will
we have
be giving her nice views on your presentation, so we will be listening to her.
Thank you very much. This was a very concise presentation on the challenges faced by women leaders in the panchayat. Are we ready for our third speaker?
Yes, ma'am, we are ready for the third speaker. So I would now like to invite Miss Maria Zarauza. She is a post-graduation student of Open University of Catalonia, Spain. She will be presenting her paper on ecofeminism, a new framework where life is the priority to transform the future. So over to you, ma'am.
Okay, thank you, Ella. Thanks for introducing me. Well, as you say, I'm going to talk about the ecofeminist movement. The ecofeminist movement is contemplated as a dialogue between the environmental movement and the feminist movement in a society close to the collapse, where humanity faces a paradigm where there will be less energy and fewer materials. This economic decline can be done in two ways: a fair, equitable way that puts the maintenance of people's life as a priority, or through a violent way in which a small percentage of people could maintain their unsustainable consumption habits at the cost of a greater number of people not living in decent conditions. The feminist and environmental movement intersect when we think about how life is sustained, where we understand that we are eco-dependent and interdependent beings. We refer to our eco-dependent relationship as we are a species that depends on nature to live and understand that nature has physical limits. Interdependence refers to the fact that we are beings that needs other people at some moment of our life. It means we need care duties that usually they have been attributed to women. Both terms from the ecofeminist point of view understand that the task of caring is not only for women, but it must distribute it and that also taking into account that nature has limits and finite resources. It contemplates the equal and fair distribution of those resources. Culture, politics, and economy, that is the pillars of societies, specifically of Western countries that also get expanded by colonial and neo-colonial processes. These pillars are developed against nature, against the material basis that allow sustaining life. We are currently facing an unprecedented ecological and social crisis. In reference to the ecological crisis, we are currently watching the consequences of the climate change, and we're suffering a crisis of energy and materials extracted from nature. Climate change, which today is an evidence and which has already been verified by the entire scientific community, is observed. For example, in plants that bloom before the insects that pollinate them, they have been born, change in the roots of the birds, change in the salinity of the sea, torrential rains that destroy harvests. The planet is obviously in a compromise, that is that we as a species that depends on the planet, we are also with it. And in addition to the ecological crisis, we live in a social moment where there is a crisis with inequalities in the access of domination. The creation of a model of certain welfare, like the one that Europe, the US apparently have, has been made thanks to the plundering of many countries. It was made during the colonies and is still being done under neocolonialism in the global south. Not only in the plundering of the natural resources these territories, because ours do not produce enough, but also the ways that we generate is also between the global south and north, not only touch economic indicators that are very visible, such as per capita income, but there are also ecological indicators such as the ecological footprint. The style of consumption that is of some countries such as Europe or United States, it's enormous. It's impossible to export this consumption model throughout the entire territory of the planet. We will need the equivalent of 30 more planets to maintain these rates of consumption if the entire population of the planet consumed that way. Logically, this produces that a part of the global population have more and the other part have less. In other words, if there are territories that consume a lot, there will be territories that consume less. So on a planet that has limits, we cannot live in a system that aims to growth in an unlimited way. That is our socioeconomic system that is called capitalism, whose main objective is that growth is infinite. There cannot be infinite growth when we live in a planet with limits that has time that must be respected. This is the eco-dependence. The second dependency is the interdependence. Human life needs people in order to live. Throughout history, those who have taken care of the care of the vulnerable bodies, home duties are women. And they have done so in areas invisible to the economy and politics, outcasts of the public sphere, often invisible and not recognized, because they do not generate rise to citizens. In order for people to go out to work in a paid way in the public sphere, there needs to be a series of completed household tasks such as food, washing clothes, taking care of children. Then those women who have carried out this role all their lives within the homes do not have socioeconomic rights. That is, only through marriage they can get it. Only employment is considered work, that is, that which generates an economic benefit. What happened to all the women who are dedicated to the task of care within the home? That they are totally invisible. During the last decades, women have gone out in search of salary jobs, but there has not been a division of domestic work in the same proportions. Due to this new mechanism, all this care task has been neglected. There has been a crisis of care duties. How they have been alleviated for the older generation, that is the grandmothers who have taken care of the daughters when the daughters were out working, or
sorry to cut you in between, Maria.
Mechanism that is hiring people.
Sorry to interrupt you, Maria. We have like 1 minute.
Do I have only 1 minute left?
Yeah, we have 1 minute left, so you can wrap it up then. Good luck.
Perfect, yeah. Okay, I'm finishing. The ecofeminist movement the idea is to compose an economy that does not look, well, that has to look at life as the center of the person. In order to form egalitarian, fair and sustainable societies, we must modify our pillars. We must build an economy and political models where all people can have that floor of needs covered, which implies a redistribution of wealth. Logically, the model has to change. And there are certain things that we have to stop being account for economic in order to reduce the ecological footprint and destruction of resources. In other words, humanity has to learn to live with less energy consumption, with lower extraction peaks, with an expulsion of pollutants and certain limits, which are what the planet Earth gives us. All this translates into reducing consumption. Therefore, it will be also necessary to redistribute work, lower production, less work. That means having less working hours, but not only the one focusing commercial work, also the one that is doing inside of the houses, the care duty and the home duties. Society, states, institutions, and of course men are required to take over the task of caring, to come up with methods to maintain life.
You'll have to wind up.
Okay, yeah, that's all. Like
you have to end.
The main there is the eco-feminist, just sustainable models and economy by and for people that put care and life at the center. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Do we have any questions or comments? Then we can carry on to the next speaker.
We do not have any particular question from Maria. Thank you, Maria.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So we will just invite our next presenter, Dr. Chitra Lakhera, Ashoka Trust for Research in Ecology and the Environment, Bangalore, and Manipal Academy of Higher Education, Manipal, India. So she will be presenting her paper, Injustice and the Everyday, Understanding Human Rights Violation Against Women. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, sure.
You can see the presentation also?
Are you sharing the screen? Sorry, it's not visible.
No, yes, I can share it.
Okay, so you're good to go. All the best.
Okay, so there's one correction. I'm not a PhD yet. I'm just a PhD student. So,
Chitra, you have 7 minutes to present.
Good afternoon all, and the major argument of my paper is that violence against women and the injustice that follows it is rooted in our habits of perception that influence almost everything that we do in our daily lives. So to begin with, let's have a glance at some statistics. The World Health Organization in 2013 estimated that around 35% of women globally experience intimate partner violence or non-partner sexual violence. In the case of India, it transforms into about 40% of women who witness domestic violence almost every day. The latest report on crimes in India by NCRB also reported a 7% increase in the reported number of crimes against women. And I would also like to point out that this is merely the tip of the iceberg, because a lot of cases go unreported every year. Another very recent report by the Human Rights Watch in India showed how women are extremely vulnerable to sexual abuse and physical harassment at their workplace in spite of the Vishaka guidelines in place. So the point I'm trying to make is what the a very recent Supreme Court judgment also observed is that women remain entrapped in a never-ending cycle of violence and discrimination. Now, this violence has already been recognized as a human rights violation, but as Mary points out, it has been very difficult to establish women's rights as human rights in countries like India, where gender stereotypes are deeply embedded in the social structure. And as a result, a lot of powerful local groups and other traditional people often resist any change in gender roles. And in societies where feminist movements have been able to bring about some changes, Stark argues that men have devised certain ways to offset the declining sex-based privileges, and in this way men are able to also stifle and co-opt women's gains, and they continue to exert control on them and limit their access within the household and outside of it. So, in other words, it kind of gives a very subtle sanction to intermittent and often regular violence and discrimination. As a result, women adapt to both physical and psychological oppression, and similar coercive practices penetrate different public discourses where we see a certain kind of women being portrayed in the cinema or in literature. So what happens as a result is that we tend to think that the government is making certain policies and new legal reforms, but the social reality of women is something else altogether. And eventually, in the process, violence against women becomes a normal part of our everyday life, and women are rendered dependent and unable to carry any decision making, whether about their careers or about their professions or even choosing their own partners. And women's labor is always underplayed, whether inside the household or outside of it. I would like to illustrate this with an example. Can you see the slides? So
Yes,
this is so this is the general the typical image of a farmer that we have when we think of it, but this is often the reality. So it's about 75% of rural women in India are engaged in some sort of farm activity, but we hardly ever hear about them because they are sort of made invisible in the public discourse. So, getting back to the point of violence, so when women face violence or discrimination, they tend to go towards the judiciary for some sort of justice. But in spite of there being a lot of judicial and legal mechanisms, violence against women continues, because there is a stark difference, or the social reality of women and what is promised in law are very opposite to each other, and there is little cultural check-in on violence against women, which is unlike any other thing able to transcend class and caste boundaries. And often activists and even scholars focus on things such as miseducation, social deviance, or psychological derangement of particular people or groups who can be rehabilitated to behave in an improved manner towards women, which takes the problem into a very different dimension. But more importantly, by making judiciary as the only recourse to justice, violence or discrimination are transformed into legal problems. So the problem with this is that the legal framework often tends to separate itself from the problem at hand. So it tries to view the problem from the outside as if it were, operating independently of all the socio-cultural influences. And as
Sorry to interrupt you, ma'am. You have
okay.
1 minute left to wrap it up.
Okay, and as McKinnon also points out, there's a problem with the objective standard of law, which appears to be objective, but is actually only an opinion of a group of powerful men. So what I was focusing on in this paper is that there is a collective complicity of the larger society that sanctions normalization of women's inferiority and therefore violence against women. Now, I draw from the work of James Baldwin, a Black American writer who talked a lot about how blacks were oppressed in the U.S. So he talks about how the whites were not only able to oppress blacks, but they were also able to brainwash blacks into believing that they were animals and they were inferior to the whites. So something similar happens with women, where women tend to observe and view themselves from a male gaze. So I am suggesting that any approach to justice would therefore begin by questioning these habits of perception that create a certain definition of a womanhood in our mind, and the manner in which one's everyday relationships and modes of being in society are shaped by various historical and sociocultural elements. So then justice then is not just something which is granted in courtrooms, but it is an ongoing movement within each one of us that challenges these
Sorry to interrupt you, ma'am.
false
Actually, you have few
concepts.
seconds left.
Yes, it's done. It's done. So thank you for the opportunity, and these are the references that I've used.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Ma'am will be giving you some feedback.
Thank you, Chitra. It was very nice to hear about your formulation where you talked about how violence is normalized and how women also internalize the male gaze. Wish you the best, and shall we carry on to our next speaker, please?
Sure, ma'am. So I would like to invite our next speaker, Ms. Pubali Bhattacharya. She is a postgraduate student at Department of Human Rights and Human Development in Rabindra Bharati University. She will be presenting her paper, Violation of Women's Rights and Status of Women in India. Good luck, Pubali, and don't forget to stick to the time of 7 minutes.
Yes, sure. Hello, I'm Pubali Bhattacharya. I'm a postgraduate student at Rabindra Bharati University. I'd like to start my paper. Please, Victoria, can you present the slide? Victoria, can you present the slides, please? Thank you. So my paper is on violations of women's rights and the status of women in India. So as we know right now, India is going through a lot, and it's progressing on a lot of factors. Victoria, please, the second slide. India is growing through a lot and going on scientifically it's improving a lot. But the thing that we're lacking a lot is how the country is treating its daughter. So as we know, India, like major countries of the world, are really dependent on the religion aspects and the society developed around those aspects. So women in India are more treated like deities than they are humans. They are preferred to be put on a pedestal and to be worshipped and to be thought of as an ideal, but not as a human. As a human, when we see a woman, they are not treated fair enough. They are not given the basic rights. And as we can see, most of the time, they are violated in the worst way possible while we are continuing to worship them as deities. Please, the next slide. While we are talking about women, we often see that we do not think them as people. Rather, we think them as roles. When we are talking about women, we maximally cite them as mothers, sisters, daughters, but never as people. While men are describing themselves as powerful, as leaders, as some people who can do something in the world, women are always to be seeked as someone who is sacrificing, who is giving, and who is being endured for all the things that is bad in the world. Women's rights are human rights too. Human rights, as we know, are inalienable and they are inborn. So no government or no societal platforms can take those human rights away from us. But that is something that is happening regularly on a daily basis. There are government policies to ensure that women's rights are protected, but the reality is far away from the pen and paper thing. In pen and paper there are rights, there are a lot of protection, but in reality we can see that the implementations of those acts are not very stark. The next slide please. So women's rights are violated through a lot of dimensions. Here I have listed some of the dimensions such as rape, female feticides, child marriage, education, domestic violence, harassment in workplace, and societal exclusions. These are the main violations of women's rights that we see in everyday world. Next slide please. So a lot of time we start to compare, like women were in a bad state in the ancient times and now they are in comparison there are a lot of good state in this time. So in comparison we can see how India has been treating women since ancient time and now as well. Women in ancient time, I'm specifically talking about the later Vedic period, started to be treated as a property rather than a human in the society. They were deprived the rights of education, the rights to choose a husband, the rights to decide anything about their life, and they were placed as an object of honor of their family instead. Sati, the banning of widow remarriage, and several strict laws of the societies were placed in order to control the women of the society. Next slide, please. But even we say that situations have improved a lot for women in India today, we cannot be very much sure. The sex ratio of female to males is 933 female per 1,000 males. According to the National Crime Records Bureau, every day 87 rapes were registered in the year 2019. According to Expat Insider, India is the fifth most dangerous country for women in the world. 20 women die every day as a result of harassment or dowry. So this is not the better state that we were expecting for. This is not the better state of women we were expecting for sitting in 2020 right now. And next slide, please. So I have conducted a little experiment. Due to the pandemic, I was not able to take a larger sample of data. I had taken 20 females aged between 20 to 30 years old, and they were presented with a questionnaire having 15 questions based on the fact whether they knew what their rights were, when was the first time they were violated, if they knew what harassment means or consent means. So the overall knowledge of what harassment means and if they were provided any sexual education. So in the results, we saw a lot of discrepancies. See, in the limitations, as the experiment was done in a pandemic situation, we had to take only 20 females and maximum of them data was collected through telephone lines. A few data was collected in person. I had collected in person. Next slide, please. So the highlights that I saw in that survey were 75% of the women I had interviewed were sexually harassed before they had reached puberty. Only 10% were aware that they were being harassed when they were harassed in childhood. 80% discriminated by the family in some way for being women. It's not that all of them had brothers in their families and stuff, but yet they were discriminated on a basis of education, on basis of jobs. They were not allowed to have the jobs post midnight or stuff just because they were women. 70% faced workplace harassment and only 30% of them reported those harassments. Only
sorry to interrupt you,
65%.
ma'am. You have just 1 minute left, so you can wrap it up. So
Okay, thanks.
all the best.
Only 65% thinks that marital rape is a crime. Next slide, please. So there are some things that I got to saw. A shocking amount of women faces harassment regularly. Only a small person of them actually reports this because women are losing faith from judicial system. The judicial system being so slow right now, cases are being filed and they are being kept for years after years, and they have got no justice. So women are losing faith on the judicial system, and they do not want to report because they know that nothing will come out of it. Most women I have interviewed do not know or do not have a clear idea of what consent is. So maximum of them do not see marital rape as a criminal offense. Only 8 out of 20 people I have interviewed considered raised being a positive, affectionate environment. So their home environment is not a very positive one either. They have been raised in violence. They are used to seeing violence. So people who are raised and used to seeing violence, it's harder for them to understand what it is to just report and get out of it. They are very used to it. Next slide, please. So as a conclusion, I can say that the justice system needs to be speedy. Awareness needs to be made about women, about their women's rights. A lot of educational women even lack the basic knowledge of their rights, and they do not know what their rights are. So sex education is also one of the things that needs to be made mandatory in the education system, like every other subject that is taught to us. With this, I will rest my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Pubali. Thank you for your presentation. I guess we have lost the connection with ma'am. Okay. On behalf of the Department of Disability Studies and Department of Human Rights and Human Development, I would like to thank you, ma'am. Anchita, ma'am, you have made the session a lot more interesting. Your presence made the session a lot more captivating and analytical as you lead and made this presentation illustrious. I would also like to thank all the participants from across the globe who have presented their papers so well and with full enthusiasm. Moving on to the next half. Now, I would like to invite the esteemed chairperson, Professor Swati Ghosh, the Director of Women's Studies Center of Rabindra Bharati University, to say a few words and begin the next session. Over to you, ma'am.
Okay. I'm audible?
Yes, ma'am, you're audible.
Allow me to kindly say a word of welcome, please.
Sure, ma'am. Okay, so I would now like to invite. Hello.
Hello.
Hello. Yeah, am I audible?
Yes. Parveen, thank you. I just wanted to extend a very warm welcome to one of my favorite persons, the director of the Women's Studies Center at Rabindra Bharati University, a profound scientist and an academic in the area of gender. She is an economist by training, and she's widely published in esteemed journals, perhaps the most important being the Economic and Political Weekly, amongst many others. Her recent, perhaps, is the Oxford University Press, the OUP publication, which is titled The Gendered Proletariat. And if you look at it, it delves really deeply through the defining context of sex work, very closely and critically bringing to the fore the inherent fault lines of sex work and how the incorporation of prostitution work is perhaps impossible and incomplete in the segment of the worker, much less as a citizen. So this is, of course, for me, a wonderful opportunity to welcome Shatidi amongst us once again. And thank you for always being there. And if I may add, both professionally and personally, thank you. And we have a very interesting panel of speakers after this. So please enjoy the session. Thank you all.
Thank you, Payal, for this one introduction. And good afternoon, everybody. But before I start, on behalf of Women's Studies Center, Rabindra Bharati University, I would like to congratulate my young colleagues, Dr. Payal Raichaudhuri, Coordinator of the Department of Human Rights and Human Development, Rabindra Bharati University, and Dr. Sanjay Kumar Yadav, coordinator of the Department of Disability Studies of Rabindra Bharati, for organizing this week-long international webinar stretching from the World Disability Day on 3rd December to the International Human Rights Day on 10th December, especially because in these trying times of COVID pandemic, academics everywhere is pushed back to the back seat. While my colleagues have taken up the additional responsibility to remind us that it is the vulnerable group that matter the most. Therefore, my double congratulations to both of you. Today, I find, is a celebration of Women's Day in both the sessions. And this particular session is on vulnerability of women and girls. I feel honored and happy to be here. So, well, without wasting time, we'll start. We have 5 papers, very interesting titles. And because we started late, maybe if you agree, I think we can have 8 minutes for each of you and another 10 minutes for discussion, for question and answer. Is that all right?
Yeah, ma'am, sure. All the participants are already having like 7 minutes of time limits, ma'am. So
Okay.
I would just like to request all the participants to stick to that time limit, and I will just remind everyone whenever the time is like ending near to the finish line. So you will be leading the session, ma'am. Best of luck,
Sure.
and thank you so much.
Okay, okay. So we have the first speaker, Tahmina Akhtar Deepu. She's a student from Bangladesh and Liberation War Studies in Noakhali Science and Technology University, Bangladesh. The name of her paper is Struggles and Vulnerabilities of Women in Bangladesh During COVID-19 Pandemic. So very
May I
important.
audible, ma'am? Thank you, ma'am.
Yes.
May I audible?
Yes, please start.
Thank you all. Thank you all to hear me. My paper's name is Struggles and Vulnerabilities of Women in Bangladesh During COVID-19 Pandemic. The most terrifying thing in the most terrifying things in the world today is the coronavirus or COVID-19, which has made the world unstable and panic. Worldwide, the women are being treated inhumanly in coronavirus circumstances, along with the social chaos. Women in Bangladesh are being tortured in various ways. The women are being abused in workplace, on the streets, in the public transport, in madrasas, and even on the social media. In the coronavirus situation, the rate of rape and the inhuman treatment of women in Bangladesh has increased more than before. It has seen the husbands who have lost their jobs and come back home and have tortured their wives for dowry. According to the Bangladesh Mahila Parishad, about 249 women and children have raped in August alone. Of these 32 have been gang raped, and most of the rapes have been reported. On the other hand, according to the report provided by the Ain Salasi Kendra in Bangladesh, about 975 women have been raped in the country in the past 9 months, and of these 246 women have been gang raped, and beside 43 unfortunately women are killed after being raped, and 12 women have been committed suicide. Women and children are being deprived by the acquaintances and families as well as. Ma'am, second slide please. Objectives of study. Objective of my study is finding out the struggle and vulnerabilities that women are facing during the pandemic situation, finding out the root causes of the sufferings of women during the pandemic, finding the social structures behind the sufferings of women during the pandemic. Most of our data is collected from is primary data, and secondary sources also have been used. Next slide, please, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Women struggles during COVID-19. In the current situation of COVID-19, the non-violence and violence against women in Bangladesh has only surprised the whole world. The struggle of women is not only against the male-dominant society, but also the struggle with unemployment, weakness, and poverty. As a result, the women are being tortured and neglected in various ways. Due to the poverty of women, they are being neglected in various ways in different levels of society, including family. One woman is Asma Akhtar, about 30 years old, who used to work in garments. His income supported his son and his family. Moreover, her husband is addicted to drug due to which her husband does not work. Asma is currently unable to work, and her husband and mother-in-law are torturing her a lot. Her son's reading and writing are also stopped. On the other hand, another woman is Taslima. She is a housemaid in rural area, but in the pandemic time, she can't work. On the other hand, her husband got another marriage in Dhaka. He doesn't take any accountability of Taslima. So she hasn't any to lead life with 2 children. Another girl name is Tafisa, about 16 years old. She had just completed her SSC examination, but she has forced into marriage by her father. All her education has been stopped. Now she is pregnant of 3 months. At this moment, she faces a lot of health problem in the COVID-19 situation. Ma'am, next slide, please. Women also faces many problems in the COVID-19 situation. They also face working struggle during pandemic time, social media abusing. People are using social media a huge time of the day. The widespread use of social networking site is obviously growing phenomenon among people, but the use of social networking sites are resulted to many abuses, which is invariably shadowing its benefits. Abuse such as cyber stalking, cyber fraud, identified theft, pornography, cyber trolling, etc. Among the interviews of 67.9% women faced various kinds of social media harassment on public transport. A somewhat surprising revelation of such study is that males belonging to the relatively older age group of 41 to 60 years have been identified as the major perpetrators. This group has been identified as a perpetrators of 66% of such incidents. Challenging of girls' education during COVID-19 time. Here I also, ma'am, second slide please. Next slide please.
Tahmina, you have to be. You have
Ma'am,
2 minutes. 2 minutes.
Okay, ma'am. Okay, ma'am. Ma'am, next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yes, this. Here are some recommendations to end the violence against women in any kind of situation. Encouraging women empowerment around the world. Most of the women and domestic workers are women. The situation has been critical for them. About 72% of domestic workers have lost their jobs. They have any earning way to face a lot of problems, not only our houses but also outside of the home. They have lost their job, so it is necessary to women empowerment. Nowadays the women entrepreneurship are increasingly rapidly. It is positive side of the women empowerment. Role of the different NGOs in the pandemic situation, women become powerless and burden in the family. So in this case, some of our government and non-government NGO given and the training on online platform, initiative to eradicate the abuse of women, and establishment of moral education in the society. Ma'am, next slide, please. In the light of this data, in which more than 3 women globally reported having experienced physical or sexual partner violence or sexual violence by non-partner, and almost every girls in the South Asian region have faced some same kind of abusing during the COVID-19 period. This is the public health problem and epidemic. The proposition it prevails all the parts of the globe, causes of great human suffering, puts women health at risk, and in the limits their the participation in the society. Thank you all to hear my presentation.
Thank you, Tahmina, for this very precise presentation and for highlighting the Bangladesh situation of violence and abuse on women. which is, you referred that it is related to the economic condition as well and increases with poverty, as well as you brought in the issue of social media abuse. So thank you very much. It was a very good presentation. So we start with the second one. Second presentation will be by Aisha Shagufta, student of St. Joseph's College, Bangalore, India. Her paper is on intersectional feminism and analysis of caste-based violence. Welcome, Aisha.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Good afternoon to the respected chair, organizers, teams, and fellow presenters, and one and all present here. My name is Aisha. I'm from St. Joseph's College, and my paper is Intersectional Feminism and Analysis of Caste-Based Violence. Pardon me, I don't have a PPT for this presentation, but I'll talk through my paper. So so the introduction, what is intersectional feminism? The term intersectionality was actually coined by Kimberly Crenshaw. She was an American social theorist. And intersectionality in its basic term is a nuanced research paradigm. It is a study of interconnecting social identities such as race, ethnicity, disability, caste, gender, sexual orientation, etc., and the related social oppression. Intersectionality, in its core essence, revolutionized our understanding that there can be no equality without equality of all forms, and to annihilate the extent hierarchy. So the objectives of my paper. So the first objective is, due to the differences and interconnection of social identities, women of different social backgrounds have difficulty identifying their issues within the mainstream feminist dialogues. Intersectionality is a way to foster the voices of the marginalized in the society. In the context of Dalit women, the paper considers two oppressive systems. Number one, patriarchy, and the second one being the caste system. The paper tries to analyze the dual marginality of Dalit women through conceptual writings of Dalit feminist writers and activists. So it is a qualitative research, and the paper uses different books, research articles, and analyzes and case studies to analyze the dual marginality of Dalit women using intersectional approach. The paper explored various social theories to discuss the dual marginality of women and Dalit women, and connected with the recent studies in the realm of Dalit feminism. To start off my key observations, I would like to state a quote by Rashida Manjoo. She's a special UN rapporteur on violence against women. So she says the intergenerational nature of caste discrimination condemns women to a life of exclusion, marginalization, and disadvantage in every sphere of life. Many of these women are denied an education and economic opportunities and perform dangerous and unprotected work, including modern forms of slavery. So the key observation and the need for intersectionality is, according to an analysis of the 2016 National Crimes Record Bureau, NCRB, data, there was a 25% rise in crimes against Dalit in over a decade. Dalit women are physically and sexually and mentally assaulted, raped, murdered. They face forced prostitution. And Devdasi system is just one example of the exploitative caste system. In the context of sexual violence and rape of Dalit women, it often plays a pedagogical function. So it is estimated that around 21 Dalit women are raped each week. And according to National Family Health Survey, by the age of 15, 33.2% scheduled caste women experience physical violence. And the same figure for non-Dalit women is 19.7%. The conviction rate for rape cases against all women in India is a mere 25%, and for Dalit women, the conviction rate drops to an abysmal 2%. According to Roja Singh's book, The Spotted Goddess, she says People's Watch, a Dalit human rights organization in Chennai, documented 1,346 rape cases of Dalit women and 4,410 specific cases of physical violence against Dalits in 2009, and only 268 cases made it to the courtroom. To conclude my paper, I would like to say that Dalit women are in a constellational loop of atrocities by virtue of both their caste and gender. Physical assault, sexual assault, rape, murder, forced prostitution, domestic violence are just a few widespread heinous crimes faced by a Dalit women. Dalits face violation in regards of their civil, social, political, and human rights, not only by the upper caste communities, but also by different functionaries of the government. This resulted in a reduced accountability of the society as a whole towards the criminal and social violence against Dalit community, which has resulted in the culture of impunity. As a way forward or recommendation, I have discussed two broad ideas in paper, that is, institution matters. We have collectively failed to recognize the potency of caste system and caste-based violence, especially at the international realm. Moreover, due to globalization and migration, the complexity of this symbolic violence or caste-based violence have increased. We need to reform our institutions, be it the government, education system, the judicial system, as well as the police, to tackle this violence. The second broad category that I have discussed in my paper is about data collection. There is an ambiguity and a large gap in traditional data collection methods when it comes to studying gender equity. The traditional methods of data collection do not account for intersectional approach of understanding social identities and realities. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Aisha. You have also completed in time. I would like to congratulate you for taking up this issue of intersectionality, which is a theoretical thing in today's feminist analysis, and dual marginality of Dalit women that explicates why violence is no longer, you cannot explain violence as a monolithic event today. It has its root in not only caste, gender, class, migration. You mentioned many of them, but I think I will ask you to take a note that there is also Dalit patriarchy. So within community of the Dalits, there are also certain kind of violences which are being noticed by feminists today in their studies. Okay, thank you very much. It was a wonderful presentation.
Thank you, ma'am.
So we ask now Rudrani Ghoshal. She's a third speaker. She is postgraduate student in human rights, University of Calcutta, West Bengal. The name of her paper is Abortion, a Wishful Conviction for Women. It's a question. Analyzing the rights of women in the light of the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Amendment Bill 2020. Over to you, Rudrani.
Ma'am, am I audible?
Yes, clearly.
Good morning. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I'd like to express my gratitude to Rabindra Bharati University, the Department of Human Rights and Human Development, and the Department of Disability Studies for organizing this webinar on human rights and vulnerable groups and giving me the opportunity to present my paper here. I'm also eternally grateful to Professor Dr. Manik Chakraborty for encouraging me and guiding me tirelessly in completion of this project, and my family for my mere existence. The current pandemic has only heightened the misery of the vulnerable sections, and especially in this patriarchal milieu, women face the wretched consequences in their daily struggle for dignity. Swami Vivekananda once said, "The best thermometer to the progress of a nation is its treatment of its women." It's ironic, the treatment of the women in a society that would rather believe in mythological empowerment than real. This serves as the pretext for my paper that is titled Abortion, a Wishful Conviction for Women, Analyzing the Rights of Women in Light of the Medical Termination of Pregnancy Amendment Bill of 2020, focusing on a woman's right to self-autonomy. Going through some data, National Crime Records Bureau's annual report of 2019 reported a spike in cases of crimes against women by 7.3%, taking the crime rate registered per lakh women from 58.8% in 2018 to 62.4% in 2019. An article from The Hindu reported 1,147 registered cases of domestic violence between March 25 and May 31 alone, sexual violence being at an unparalleled 80.6%. Now, the consequence of these crimes, the socially unsanctioned pregnancies, is the focal point here. According to the report by Pratigya Campaign for Gender Equality and Self-Abortion, in 2016, there was a sudden spurt of writ petitions being filed in the Supreme Court seeking permission for termination of pregnancies which were beyond the 20 weeks gestational period, and this ultimately resulted in the introduction and passing of the MTP Amendment Bill by the Lok Sabha in March 2020. Previously, the only exclusive legislation on this much tabooed issue of abortion was the conspicuously antediluvian MTP Act of 1971, introduced as an exception to sections 312 and 313 of the Indian Penal Code, which prohibits abortion by criminalizing intentionally causing miscarriage, irrespective of the consent of the woman, and it allowed for a gestational limit of 20 weeks for those availing the service. But despite a legitimate legislation, the simultaneous inaccessibility and illegal exploitation of the service continued. According to the Lancet Global Health Report of 2019, 15.6 million abortions occurred here in 2015, of which 78% were conducted outside of health facilities. Even in the most developed countries of the world, abortion is not only criminalized but legally constrained by laws such as the targeted regulation of abortion providers in the US. Globally, about 125 countries offer conditional abortion services, including socio-economic, mental and physical health and fetal abnormalities as grounds, while 6 countries completely ban every method of abortion in their territories. The paper seeks to draw a short comparison between the different abortion legislations, especially in USA, China, Burkina Faso, Zambia, and El Salvador. Coming back to India, the MTP Amendment Bill of 2020 makes 4 primary recommendations. Number 1, about the requirement for authorization of a registered medical practitioner at different gestational periods. Number 2, the applicability of a 24-week relaxation time as decided by the government, but only to a special category of women. Number 3, the norms of the medical practitioners as notified by the government. And number 4, replacement of the phrase married woman and her husband with the phrase woman and her partner in case of contraceptive failure to avoid physical and mental agony from unwanted pregnancies. Although pretendedly reformist and liberal, the bill might just as well be a masquerade for various legislative leukiny, like number 1, the non-uniform applicability of the bill to all pregnant women alike, and the clause of undesirable circumstances, fueling the pyre of mainstream inadmissibility of socially unsanctioned fetuses. Number 2, there's disregard for women prisoners, sex workers, widows, and divorcees, and it fails to address the social and psychological and, most importantly, financial impediments that a woman might face while raising the child. The biologically competent transgenders recognized under the Transgender Persons Protection and Rights Act of 2019 are also ignored. But most importantly, there's a violation of a woman's bodily sovereignty, autonomy, and her reproductive rights in disregard of a woman's will in seeking abortion. There's also an appalling violation of a child's right to life because every child under the ambit of Article 21 of the Indian Constitution is entitled to the basic hospitable standards for holistic development and growth. In making the medical boards the decision-making authority instead of the woman, it's conspicuous the prerogative of the bill in camouflaging a woman's own will and appears to be but a mere cosmetic attempt at effectuating a legislative demand. However, the harrowing absence of decriminalization of abortion in its entirety still prevails. Our judiciary, despite its non-uniform interpretation of abortion laws, has contrastingly also established abortion as a fundamental right in the Suchita Srivastava versus Chandigarh administration case. Some NGOs like IPAS, which introduced comprehensive abortion care services for the first time in India, further works to sensitize women of their sexual and reproductive rights and the availability of contraceptive services. To conclude, The issues concerning the bill are multifaceted. Number one, breach of bodily autonomy of women and their right to choose. Number two, multidimensional infringement of right to life under Article 21 and right to equality in exclusion of women prisoners, widows, sex workers, and transgenders. Number three, the breach of a woman's right to privacy and her right to make reproductive choices, which is a clear prioritization of the pro-life stand in the pro-life, pro-choice dichotomy. In the long term, a prospective policy paralysis appears to threaten the bona fide implementation of the bill. India is a land of Ardhanarishwara, the ultimate epitome of the non-competitive coexistence of feminine and masculine energies, and India's aspiration as a global superpower necessitates the rehabilitation of the status of women in the country, while combating political rivalries, conservative hypocrisies, and outright ridiculous practices in the name of traditions. The hostility and acknowledgement of women's choice of motherhood needs to change. Quoting the wise words of Swami Vivekananda, there is no chance of welfare of the world unless the condition of women is improved. It is not possible for a bird to fly on one wing. Thank you and Jai Hind.
Thank you, Rudrani. I congratulate you for taking up this contemporary and very sensitive issue and pinpointing the loopholes in the MTP Amendment Bill of 2020. We have definitely passed the phase of abortion as pro-life and pro-choice debate of the 70s, 80s, and have entered a domain of the rights of marginal women. And that is what you have elaborated in your paper. So that was the best part of it. I hope you will work on it further. And it was very befitting in this seminar. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.
So I would ask the next speaker, Parveen Banu, to come up. Welcome, Parveen. Postgraduate. She's a postgraduate student at the Department of Disability Studies, Rabindra Bharati University. So you are already acquainted with her. The name of her paper is Vulnerability of Women During COVID-19. A very interesting topic and very relevant one. Over to Parveen.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you, ma'am. First of all, very good afternoon to everyone. So today I will be presenting my research paper, which I have limited to the condition of women in India. In Indian society, we have seen that women are not equally acknowledged as well as men are. So I would like to begin the presentation. Victoria, please change the slide. Yeah, the next one. Yeah. Okay. So women are the architect of society, the epitome of strength, and the pillar of the nation. India, where goddesses are worshipped and believed to be the symbol of power, knowledge, and victory of good over evil, the status of woman is still compromised. The land of deities ironically lacks in securing its own girls and women. Misogyny and patriarchy anyhow over the years managed to suppress the voice of women. The outbreak of pandemic-like situation has not only changed the way of life, but as well highlighted the dark the women were still in. Here, we will be shedding light to the current condition of women during pandemic situation and the deprivation from human rights in detail, whereas discussing the possible outcomes of the fight back. Next slide, please. So before going on to the topic of women as vulnerable groups, I would just like to state what vulnerable groups actually mean. Vulnerable groups refer to those groups who are likely to be at greater risk from different threats compared to the rest of the population. These groups of people get more affected in situations like poverty, social and personal discrimination, violence, etc. When any disaster strikes or disease outbreaks, these groups are the most vulnerable ones to get directly associated with the threats. Some of the common characteristic traits of vulnerable groups are as followed: suffering due to the subordination and discrimination, differentiated by physical or cultural traits, sharing collective identity and common burdens, etc. Next slide, please. So what makes women vulnerable? That's a very interesting question. So in India, women are vulnerable due to various reasons. Let's see which are the reasons. In India, women based on ethnicity, caste, class face violence and discrimination. Patriarchy being a prevalent part of Indian society and acceptance towards the established roles, positions, and violence entitled to women are responsible for their vulnerability. Various striking issues exasperate the vulnerability of women, such as child marriage, honor killing, feticide, infanticide, domestic violence, sexual abuse, malnourishment, unequal pay for equal amount of work at workplace, etc. Next slide, please. Status of women in India in general. So if we take a look at the last census by Government of India, we will see that only 933 females are there for every 1,000 males. So this is evident enough to say that the position of women are not really like enlightening. I mean, we are still yet to find out the way so that we can equal the number at least, if not the status. Also, we will just see that there are so many rules and laws and regulations to secure women from any type of potential threat and safeguard their rights. There are multiple laws that are enacted by the Government of India. Some of them are precisely the Prohibition of Child Marriage Act 2006, Protection of Women from Domestic Violence Act 2005, Dowry Prohibition Act 1961, Indecent Representation of Women Prohibition Act 1986, Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Prevention, Prohibition and Redressal Act 2030. So now the question is, are these acts like really affected? I mean, are they really securing their position and their strata in the society? So to look at that, we will go to the next slide. Victoria, next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. So we will just see here that what are all the rights that are violated on daily basis. I have just highlighted the few ones like right to education, right to equality, right to health, political rights, right to live with dignity, right to equal opportunity for employment and right to equal wage for equal work, right to protection from society, state and family system. Next slide, please. The rise of pandemic has changed women's situation as they have been entitled to a place they were running away from. So most of the women are restricted back at their homes and they were finding a way out and they were working independently outside their homes. So when the pandemic outbreak, they just had to stay back at their home and do the homely work, which is why they were not feeling that much secure. And why so? Because they were entitled to more like suppression. They could not raise their voice. They could not make decisions, and they had that authority of a male over their head, and they were at every step made feel that they were inferior to them, for which we have like seen an uprise in the cases of domestic violence during this pandemic situation. If we see in 2020, between March 25 and May 31, almost 1,477 complaints of domestic violence were made by women. These were 68-day periods recorded more complaints than those received between March and May in the previous 10 years. Next slide, please. So there were few government actions taken at that time, but which of course raised few confusion and were debated. While domestic violence was at peak, people like condemned the act of like allowing selling of alcohol. We know that alcohol consumption make it more vulnerable for the woman to like be exposed to the threats they were like afraid of. So when government allowed the selling of alcohol, these people were more like exposed to threat, the women of the family, because in the low income family they were like the men used to get drunk and beat up their wife or like dominate them or humiliate them. So just to remember that whether they were government has taken actions to like support the women who were in distress, but also their actions confused us. Next slide, please. Also, if you take a look at the rape cases, Haryana being at the top, it recorded 66 rape cases in April, which is seriously like striking us. How can it be that during a time when everybody is inside their home and the rape cases are still there, which is really like something to worry about. If we take a look at another state, Jammu and Kashmir, New Delhi has also reported cases where we have heard that there were more rape cases and molestation cases compared to the other time. Next slide, please. Also, we have heard about the Hathras case in Uttar Pradesh, which made it to the media for quite a long time, as a 19-year-old girl was raped and left alone in the field. So these inhuman acts were already showing us the condition women are in the present society in India. So I will wrap it up. Victoria, can you please, just shift the slide? Okay, I have mentioned about gender equality. Next slide, please. And that we do not raise our voice. If we do not raise our voice at the right time, we'll not be able to raise it when it is out of control. So in most of the cases we have seen, be it the physical or sexual violence, more likely to like keep it to themselves, not even sharing it to their partner or a friend, family, anybody. So it is resulting in something that we are not even cannot even imagine till the time they come out of their shelter and just speak about it. So what are the solutions that we can do? Victoria, can you please yeah, next slide. Okay. So to conclude, I will say that spreading awareness, uplift the situation of women is very much important. And what we can do at the beginning is like educating our girls as well as our boys, so that they can know how we should treat people, how everyone should be respected and everyone deserves it. It is not that anybody is inferior to anyone. Second is creating public awareness campaigns in remote as well as in urban areas. In social media should be positively used to generate online awareness programs and donation drives to raise money for providing essential hygiene accessories. Next slide, please. Next slide. Okay. To conclude, I will just say that irrespective of the situation and severity of consequences, we the humans need to come out of the boundaries and fight these age-old prejudices and the pride in equality. Women and men need to take responsibility in spreading awareness as well as motivating people to open up and share their story to the world to seek justice. If everyone will come out and do their little part, that they won't be far when we will actually visualize women empowerment. So with this, I would like to end my presentation. Thank you, ma'am, and thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you, Parveen. Yes, you started with a very good, very comprehensive definition of vulnerability. And you mentioned the low, what I liked best was that you mentioned the low sex ratio in India, that is fewer number of women, which is related to subordinated status of women. And there lies the root cause of violence. So thank you for that part. But I would just like to add, please take note of when you talk about vulnerability, you did focus on the violence on women, but also if you could mention the loss of job that women had to undergo during the COVID period, the decline in pay, the non-payment at all, deferring the payment, this was also a very important factor to influence their low autonomy and control over their own lives within the personal domain. Okay,
sure, ma'am. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
So we have the fifth paper now. That's by Anu Malhotra. Yes, you are ready, I hope.
Yes, ma'am.
Anu is assistant professor at SS Jain Subodh PG Autonomous College, Jaipur, India. The title of her paper is Sexual Violence Against Women as a Weapon of War and Conflict.
Thank you, ma'am. May I start?
Yes, please start.
Ma'am, please start the slides. Yes. Thank you, Rabindra Bharati University, for giving me a chance to speak. Now, my topic is sexual violence against women as a weapon of war. Now, where are we in the weapon? I mean, where are we in the war? Are women there in the war? Are we physically fighting the war? No. But why are we being made a victim of that violence? I just want to know this. Where are we? Are we fighting the war? No. but then still we are made a victim of that violence. The violence is perpetrated on the women. Next slide, please, ma'am. Yeah, I just want to give a certain data. Now, more than 40,000 women were raped in Liberia. They were victims of sexual violence. More than 60,000 in Yugoslavia, along with the time period. And recently, we know about Boko Haram in Democratic Republic of Congo, Sierra Leone, and of course, Iraq, the Yazidi girls. You know, we have so many, the data is like horrifying. But what I basically want to tell is like, why this is happening? Why are we doing this? What is wrong with us? You know, the women, you have heard about Rani Padmavati, you've heard about Rani Karnavati. They were forced to commit Johar. Why? Because they knew once their husbands were dead in war, they would be taken by the Mughals and, you know, kept as sex slaves. They would be kept in the harem of maybe 20,000, 30,000 women. To escape that, you know, that horrifying fate, they all put themselves into a pit of fire. This has been happening since long. Why are women being made? What did the women do? What is our fault? What is the fault of the women? Just because the women are, you know, the weaker sex, they are being used as a weapon. Next slide, please, ma'am. Yes, I would like to mention some specific examples. Let's go to the Vietnam War. This photograph is of a young 9-year-old girl. Her name is Phan Thi Kim Phuc. I think we've all seen this. It's a very famous photograph. She was like hurt by the chemical attack by the US during the war. Her back is burning and she is running around. Now she's very much alive in Canada. And yes, this photograph, yes, she is being made the UNESCO Goodwill Ambassador for a certain period of time. But what was her fault? Just because she was a part of that warfare. And then, you know, there was this My Lai massacre in 1968 in which 500 girls were raped and tortured by American soldiers. Now, this was used, this area, the Southeast Asia was used as a rest and recreation base for American soldiers. Now, maybe that is one reason, but I can feel that, yes, even, you know, that Thailand is a, you know, place for sex tourism, that area. Why? Because these women know nothing else. This is what they've been doing for generations. So maybe it has its roots in this fact that, yes, it's a hub of sex tourism. This is the profession they do. This is a profession, is maybe it has its roots in the Vietnam War. So maybe one reason for this is that. So why? Because they were made to go into, first they were forced to do it and then they took it up willingly. Next slide, please, ma'am. Yes, then now this is another deadliest terror group. This is the Boko Haram group in Nigeria. It first came into prominence when it kidnapped 276 girls from a boarding school, you know, very young girls, and in 2014 for rape and forced marriage. Now these girls were raped, then they were sold to some other men. And continuous, you know, it's like a chain. You first rape the girl, maybe if you like her, you keep her, and then you transfer her to the other man. And it goes on and on. These women, you know, they have unwanted pregnancies. They don't know what to do. Families are not willing to take them back. So they have a fate worse than death. Now, next slide, please, ma'am. Yes, this is the most recent case. That is this is a photograph of Nadia. We've all heard of her. She got the UN Peace Prize, Nobel Peace Prize in 2018. Yes, this is a photograph, the first one. The second one is of the torture the IS has inflicted on the young girls. You know, 10,000 Yazidi, just because it's ethnic cleansing. Now, this is the second point. This is ethnic cleansing. They just want to, you know, get rid of these girls. They feel this tribe or this community is lower to us. We don't want them. So what is the way? To strike at the weaker sex. You beat the men, you fight with them. Yes, you don't feel fulfilled until you strike at the weaker sex. So you try to rape the women, take them away. So it's like, you know, you are hurting the honor of the person. The honor of the person, that is more important. By capturing their women. Now look at the mindset of the people. Is this what we are teaching our boys? Is this what we are teaching our men? That if you want to strike at a particular community, or if you want revenge, you have to strike at the women. Very sad. Next slide, please, ma'am. Yes, why victims? Yes, again, that's what I've been telling throughout, that because we feel conquest is not complete until the women are taken. Now, this is one point that you feel, yes, because you hurt the woman, you hurt the honor of the community or the tribe or the family. Second, you infect women through rape, you infect them with HIV. You know, and then, you know, once they get infected, they become incapable. That is the target community, and she cannot propagate her dynasty properly. Now it said, yes, then women do it willingly because they give sex for protection. This is also during war, civil wars. We say, okay, fine, I'll protect you. A particular group will say, we'll protect the women, but then you have to, you know, pay us in this way. So sex for protection is also there during war. This happened in civil war in Uganda in 1980s, and they said this was the reason for a high rate of AIDS in that country. Now, the most horrifying thing, which is like shameful, it is a kind of reward, a spoils of war. Now, what kind of society are we living in if we have to consider rape as a reward? I mean, at war, there's so much aggression in the men, and they take it as a rape as a reward. They forget their senses. What is this? Next slide, please, ma'am. Now, why are we treated? Yes, I said yes. We say yes. Virginity is very important. Virginity for girls is important, not for men. The girl has to be. You put a premium on the virginity, and then if the girl is a virgin, yes, you get married. And what about the men? Now, second point is we have a scant regard for women's dignity. We think she's a weaker sex, and why should we, care for her as a person? We all women have faced this shoving, this groping, pushing in when we go out in public places at one point or the other. I would say every woman has faced this. Now, this kind of conditioning is there in the men, and this has to be, treated. You have to actually, how do we deal with it? The thing is that we have to deal with it by, educating our boys. Not the girls, of course. Girls, of course, need to be treated to be, to take care of themselves. But the boys have to be, the gender division, that girls are inferior to you. So you hit the inferior part because you can win. You hit the inferior person. You try to, if you hit the men, you will be hit back. But the girls are, weaker. They will not hit back. So that's why you treat them that way. So this kind of gender division has to go. So this will go only by education. Next slide, please, ma'am. Yes. Now, two people who have worked on this, yes, Dr. Dennis Mukwege and Nadia Murad, both of them. Now, Dr. Dennis, he's from Congo, and how has he worked for the women? He and Nadia got the joint Nobel Prize in 2018. How has he worked for the women? He has actually treated hundreds of women, who've been victim of this war in Democratic Republic of Congo. He has treated them, and he has a Ponzi referral hospital where he has treated these women. And Nadia, she was one of the women, one of the girls, the Yazidi girls, who were captured by the ISS and tortured and, raped for months together. She tried to escape. There were a set of 3 girls who escaped, and she was one of them. Now, speaking about a horrifying act like this, the torture you've undergone is not easy, but she spoke about it. She spoke about it openly, and this came in a documentary, Reberdowski's documentary, The Yazidi Girls. She spoke about it, and she said, this must stop. One of the lines which I really, really admire, she says, I want to be the last girl with a story like mine. Look at the attitude, look at the strength of the girl. She says, yes, I've been through it. I don't want any other girl to go through it again. So both of them were given the Nobel Peace Prize in 2018. Next slide, please, ma'am. Yes. Now, what are we doing? The governments. What is the government doing? There are rules. There are rules by the government. Yes, we can. There is a UN security. There's a resolution 1820, which was adopted in 2008, which says yes, you cannot use sexual violence as a weapon of war and armed conflict because it's a war crime. Okay, is it being followed? No, that was given in 2008 and 2015-16. We're talking of the code. We're talking of the Yazidi girls. Now, there is the Rome Statute of 1998, which also established that it is a grave violation of international law. Then there is a trust fund which is implemented by the World Bank with funding from governments of Canada, Denmark, Norway, and this supports gender-sensitive programs. The programs are there, but are they working? Yes, they are doing very little bit. Women are coming forward to explain, to come out and speak about the perpetrators. But what are we trying to stop them? No. Next slide, please, ma'am. Ma'am, next slide. Yes, this is a support system by the Korean women. Korean women, Japanese women were used as comfort women. So they wanted to help out other women. They helped out the women of the the Congo violence, the Congo civil war. They have set up a butterfly fund to support the children, and the children are unwanted because nobody knows who the father is, and the father is not willing to accept the child. So the women and the children, they are outcast. So they have to be supported. This is the butterfly fund set up by the Korean women to help out these, and they've been doing it for long, maybe 7-8 years. They have been helping out. So this is what we people can do. Another thing what we can do is we have to what is there in our hands is we actually try to change the mindset of the people. What is required? The immediate thing is that you change the mindset of the people, of the men, so that they do not treat women as inferior. day women and men become equal, or the mentally they are accepted to be equal, we will not have these kind of cases. Men will not try to strike at women because they are the weaker sex. They will not have this kind of attitude. Next slide, please, ma'am. These are the references, and thank you. Next slide.
Okay. So it's complete. Okay. Thank you, Anu. Thank you. She's Dr. Anu Malhotra. Thank you for your paper presentation. And I congratulate you for raising a very important question on sexual violence and warfare. And you gave us the international picture as well. I really appreciate what you have shown us and suggestions that you told us about education of men and changing the mindset. But I have a point to make, and that is instead of focusing on men or boys, maybe we can look at the problem as a issue of sexuality and power, where masculinity tries to control the bodies of women. They try to colonize the body, so to conquer the body. That is why the rape and all political conflict, riots, and warfare. And India, we have that history
mindset. Yeah.
Especially during partition and all.
Yes, ma'am. It's like a woman's is a body to be captured. It's a booty. It's a booty for the conquerors.
Exactly. So
yes,
maybe that way it becomes easier. Otherwise, it will only, it's not the fault of men. You cannot antagonize them, but you have to make them understand the equation. Basically, it's a power equation. Okay, that much.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you so much.
It was
Thank
good.
Thank you.
Okay, if there are any questions, I have talked a lot. Any questions to anyone, any of the speakers? Not yet?
No, ma'am. Okay, I think there are no questions. Okay, so on behalf of the Department of Disability Studies and the Department of Human Rights and Human Development, I would like to thank you, ma'am, for leading the session and adding your invaluable standpoints on the presentations. Your interpretations expanded the edges of the topic and rightly added on to our knowledge. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you very much. I also enjoyed the session very much. All the papers were very good. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Also, I would like to thank all the participants from different parts of the globe who has taken out their time and presented their papers with full enthusiasm. Thank you all. Undeniably, it was a day full of illuminating discussions. Thank you all the honorary guests, presenters, and participants for being a part of the webinar. Today's session ends here, and the next session will begin tomorrow morning at 10:30 sharp. Till then, stay safe, stay healthy, stay aware, and have a good day ahead. Adios.